Change based on principle is progress. Constant change without principle becomes chaos. I shall give you several examples of integrity, expediency, and
SosKaid lifted her head from her hands. Her face was dry. She hadn't cried properly since the incident at the facility. She found she couldn't anymore, but she was devastated. How could this have happened? This world was even more unforgiving than her father had warned her. She stood up and gripped the bars of her tiny cell. She squeezed. She squeezed, feeling the anger and despair bubble up inside her. She relented and stared at the brown rust stains on her hands. She had to get out of here. She had to warn someone. SosKaid tongued the sharp, iron-tasting bobby pin she had hidden in her cheek impatiently, but she knew she had to wait. Midnight, he had said, and it was still daylight out. She went over to the small, boarded-up window of the cell. It barely let in any light, but she could hear a loud voice floating across the still marketplace of NuArk. An endless, droning speech about freedom and security and driving out anyone who threatened their way of life. She spat in the corner of the grubby cell, wiped her hands on her dulled blue vault suit, and sat down heavily. She would wait. She would get out of here, and one day, she would kill him. Hello and welcome back to A Wasteland Story. In the last episode of the show, our heroine SosKaid helped the settlement of NuArk mount a defense against an incoming super mutant attack. She casually vaporized a surprise super mutant or two and managed to take down the last one before he got away and warned his buddies. She was a hero, and she had finally found a semblance of security for the first time since escaping her village. Would it last? Of course not. But why? Stay tuned and find out on Chapter 4 of A Wasteland Story. Okay, coming back to session number 4 of SosKaid's adventures. Now, last thing, we had a really cool battle defending the settlement of NuArk, where we had 3 super mutants who weren't the brightest come in, and mostly they were taken out by a well-placed shot from SosKaid into the mini nuke that the suicidal mutant was carrying, and in true Fallout style, it blew them to pieces. One nearly escaped, but we managed to take him out as well. So since then, we've spent the afternoon or the next half a day in town. SosKaid and Aya had spent the morning together, strolling through the streets as he told her a bit about the history of NuArk. Now, I've thought about it a bit, and I think NuArk was a surprisingly untouched little settlement. I think it was maybe built down in a little crater of some sort, or at least like a valley. He explained that he had grown up here and had had a relatively quiet and safe life. NuArk was built in the shallow crater of some ancient explosion or another, and due to the barren landscape surrounding it, and due to the fact that there was no high ground nearby, it couldn't easily be seen. It had somewhat avoided detection for the most part, until recently. So it's sort of in the middle of nowhere, and it's not really clearly seen from afar, which is why it hasn't really been touched by raiders or by mutants until now. Aya's father had lent into this natural furtiveness and established a band of traders who went out regularly to trade with a nearby settlement. They'd been under strict instructions to keep the location of NuArk a secret, and had been, by all accounts, successful in keeping it that way. Until the Brotherhood had shown up. They were pretty unprepared for an attack, and SosKaid came in and basically defended, and trained them and defended the village. I realise how naive it was of us now, Aya had said, to think that we could remain hidden and not have any real defence in place. If it wasn't for you, there's no way we would have survived this attack. SosKaid nodded thoughtfully. She still couldn't believe they had done it. It felt like a kind of dream.
like she had been out of her body, shouting orders with confidence and authority. It hadn't been like her at all. She wasn't even sure if she had ever actually shouted in her life up to that point.
Not that she's an expert or anything, but she has been out in the wastes for a little while, travelling north from her village once it was raided. And we leveled up. I took a tag skill. I can't remember what the name of the perk is. Intense training, maybe, where you get to increase one of your stats, because I really want to get into building, modifying guns. And in order to do that, I need an intelligence of 6, so we leveled that up.
So just a bit of Fallout background. I came to Fallout with the older games in the 90s, and they were far more RPG-like than their modern 3D first-person perspective counterparts. There was a different company back then developing them, and I still kind of prefer that grittier, darkly funny tone that those games had, focusing on story and survival more so than the shooting and looting of the modern games. And even though the Fallout 2D20 RPG is based on those modern games, specifically Fallout 4, I wanted to try and capture more of that older feel in my and SosKaid's version of the universe. Things were less densely populated, settlements were spread out days apart rather than that more packed-in city feel of the later games. But something I did really want to bring across from the newer games was that element of crafting that was present in Fallout 4. In the game, I love collecting bits of junk, as you'll hear in future episodes, finding workbenches and putting cool mods on my favourite weapons and armour, even more so with pen and paper than I actually do in the video games. And the really nice thing I'm finding about this RPG, or perhaps RPGs in general, is that if you're open to being a little bit creative, and not being so staunch with the rules as written necessarily, you can really shape the setting to how you want it to be, and play in exactly the kind of world that you want to play in. It's unlike anything else. Anyway, that's just a thought I was having. More about those earlier games and about that crafting in the next few episodes. Back to Aya and SosKaid. He was looking at her with a strange expression.
Now, looking at the character sheet here, I see she's really not very charismatic. I think she always kept to herself. She's quite shy. So we'll see if that gets her in trouble or not. And she's not strong. She's a slight young girl.
SosKaid felt herself blush in the awkward silence, and she cleared her throat before proceeding to walk ahead of Aya. He took a few quick steps to catch up. "Tell me about this Ellsworth character," SosKaid said to Aya without looking at him as he caught up to her.
So, upon talking to Aya, Riley, and they've offered her that she can stay for as long as she wants, she'll be fed and looked after.
"Yes, well," Aya took a deep breath. "I said that we didn't often have visitors here, but there had been a few exceptions. About a year ago, before Father passed, Sir Ellsworth and Dr. Wright showed up one day.
But while she's here, there are a couple of things that need doing or that they could use help with."
They'd said they were lost and hungry after their caravan was attacked by monsters, but I remember thinking at the time that they looked too well dressed and fed to have been wandering all that long. Initially, they mostly kept to themselves and were generally helpful around town. But over the last few months, there had been more and more reports of theft and disappearances. I suspect that Ellsworth at least was involved, but I didn't have any proof until yesterday." "And where is he now?" SosKaid replied.
The first thing is that this dodgy Sir Ellsworth Deed, who was apparently running some kind of child crime syndicate, which we don't know much about yet. He basically was found out when SosKaid got her dice stolen, and he saw the changing dynamic in the village, that they were becoming a bit more aware and defensive, and so he has quietly buggered off overnight.
"That's just the thing. While you were getting ready this morning, I went to pay him a visit now that things have settled down a bit," said Aya. "And?" said SosKaid when Aya had left the sentence hanging in the air. "Well, it appears that he took the opportunity to, leave."
He took with him a power armor core that they had. They have a suit of power armor, which is someone brought in or salvaged from somewhere and has been slowly being built and repaired. But all important to power armor is the core in order to run it. So SosKaid figures and the village figures that would be a really solid basis for their defense. And he has buggered off with that because they're very valuable, presumably.
Speaking of the defense infrastructure of the town, Aya said awkwardly, we were working on fixing some power armor and training someone to use it as a means of defense for the town. But Saya came to me when I was on my way to see him this morning and told me that the core is missing. The core, you see, is crucial to... I know what the core does, interrupted SosKaid. Yes, right, of course. This time it was Aya's turn to blush. If we could get it back, it would be a huge help to NuArk. He paused, massaging one hand with the other for a moment in the silence. There would, of course, be a reward? He finished and looked relieved when SosKaid nodded. She couldn't help but like Aya. He seemed so confident and charming, and he was, but today, around her, he seemed to be struggling a little bit. She let an involuntary and uncharacteristic smile slip, and Aya looked relieved again.
So that's one of our little quests, to help build up the defenses. And part of that is going to be collecting this core, as we said. And then the other thing is that something is going on with the water source. Recently, in the last few weeks, people have been starting to get a bit sick.
This is a bit delicate, but there also seems to be some kind of illness spreading, which is a bit of a concern. You don't happen to be medically as well as militarily trained, do you? Aya grinned apologetically as SosKaid shook her head. Well, perhaps someone such as yourself with an outside perspective might see something that I haven't. Either way, you should go and speak to Dr. Wright. SosKaid raised an eyebrow at this, but Aya didn't seem to notice. He was staring off into space with a look of deep concern on his face.
Including the sister of A. O'Reilly. And so he's quite concerned about that. I know SosKaid doesn't, or Aya doesn't, but I know it's got something to do with the FEV. I'm not sure whether that's an accidental seepage of FEV into the water systems, or someone is trying to convert people into super mutants. No one's been converted into a super mutant yet. I'm not quite sure how that's going to turn out.
SosKaid cleared her throat and broke Aya's troubled focus. Right. Sorry. Actually, there are a few things I should be getting on with. Again, we would appreciate any help that you can provide. There are a few people around town who may be well worth introducing yourself to. Not that there's anyone here who doesn't know who you are already, of course, said Aya, charming smile back at full force.
Let's roll up some NPCs. So there's 3 NPCs in the village that may be worthwhile talking to. We have an influential animal. Okay, so maybe we have a ghoul.
Corey, our resident ghoul, would be a good person to see. He has been here longer than anyone can remember and knows a lot about, well, a lot, really, but he sometimes can be hard to find.
We have an influential ghoul. Studious. So he's influential, he's studious. Because he's a ghoul, he knows an awful lot. He's been around since before the war, and so he has a lot of knowledge about things. And maybe that's why he's influential. People come to talk to him if they want to learn about things or understand things. And his name... Does he have a flaw? Travel. So he does disappear from time to time. We're not quite sure what he does. Okay, we'll get his name and then we'll see if he's in town. So his name is Corey is his name.
He might be able to give you some information about the area that might be useful if you do choose to help us looking for Ellsworth.
He knows a lot about the area, so maybe we can get some locations for a map. I was very pleased. I went and found a local map shop because we're in Germany. They print everything out. So of course there's a shop full of paper maps, and I managed to find a map of the west coast of the States, which is the map that SosKaid found on the Brotherhood of Steel boy from the facility. And so it has some markings from him about the FEV. There's probably going to be some more markings from him with some locations of Brotherhood of Steel bases, including the one up in Vancouver, where SosKaid will end up at some stage. I'm not sure if that's going to be sooner or later. And maybe we can talk to him if he's here, and he can fill in some other settlements nearby, maybe some places worth scavenging, that kind of thing. And maybe he'll be able to tell us a bit more about this Sir Etsworth character.
Then there's Saya North. She's also been around a bit and may be helpful, although she can be a little stiff at times.
So, another NPC we have is... Saya North.
Saya runs the weapons workshop over there on the other side of the square, and it is said that she was a formidable fighter in her day.
She's been out on the road a long time, and she's come and settled. So she knows about weapons. So prestige and gifts. So she was a very talented fighter, and the people here don't know it because they're mostly traded, but she is a bit of a famous figure from the area.
I assume that whatever you decide to do, you may need some supplies and things, so Saya would be a worthwhile stop either way. She has also been very publicly critical of Ellsworth and Wright, so she may have some information regarding them too, but I'd take it with a grain of salt.
So she was just basically a hard wastelander who travelled around. She helped people out. She helped out various factions, take down raiders and super mutants, and helped lots of villagers, so she has a bit of a name for herself.
Aya went on and glanced a little nervously down at the trigger of the rifle SosKaid was absently-mindedly fingering as he talked. SosKaid nodded, peering across the quickly livening marketplace as normality had begun returning to the town. I have an important, meeting now, but do see what you can gather and feel free to drop into my office later if you need anything else. Thanks, Aya. I'll see what I can do, said SosKaid as she flicked the rifle back over her shoulder. Right, said Aya after a few moments of silence, and he patted her awkwardly on the shoulder. Until later, then. He smiled again and hurried off in the direction of his office. SosKaid began to make her way across the square towards Saya's weapon shop when she heard hurried footsteps behind her. It was Aya again. He looked uncomfortable. If you do go and see the good Dr. Wright about the illness cases, or Sir Ellsworth for that matter, perhaps don't mention that I sent you? Thanks again, he said in an embarrassed voice, and again hurried off. Right, thought SosKaid. The plot is definitely thickening. And she changed course and headed for the office of the good doctor instead.
And then we have Wright, who is careful that, but he is a greedy guy who everyone knows he's sort of up to no good, but everyone just sort of lets it slide. Wright runs a number of unsavory enterprises in NuArk. Slick back hair, pale skin. With Etsworth.
As SosKaid made her way around the now bustling marketplace, she could barely get 3 meters without someone smiling at her, patting her on the back, whispering their gratitude, or in some cases, giving her an unnecessarily apparent wide berth. This place was nothing like her village. At home, there'd been no real market to speak of, just people gathered around doing their daily task, washing clothes, preparing food, loosely swapping goods, but nothing organized or profitable like things seemed to be here. Her father and a handful of the other capable villagers would go and scavenge a few times a week and share out the goods when they returned, but there was no trade. Here there were competing food sellers shouting out special prices or singing the praises of the delicious qualities of their secret spice radroach meat, It reminded her of the advertisements in the magazines her father would occasionally bring home to her. Experience the explosive taste of sugar bombs. One hit and you're hooked. Or the Protectron, worth your life. Savings. SosKaid stepped up on the wooden porch where she'd first seen Wright that night before and touched her hand to the heavy metal door. Sorry, couldn't help myself. There was no knocker. Strange for a supposed doctor, she thought before jumping slightly as the door opened suddenly in front of her. She took a step back as Dr. Wright stepped out onto the porch and quickly pulled the door shut behind him.
Let's go to a character conversation. So, he's agreeable and classy.
Ah, well, if it isn't the unlikely little saviour of NuArk, said Wright, the condescension thinly veiled behind his equally thin smile. I wondered if I would have the honour to meet you before you disappeared back to wherever you came from. And what can I do for our newest celebrity?
So he's agreeable. So she talks to him and she says, okay, so I need to find what happens to this Ellsworth guy. Do you know where he... or can you help me? He says, yes, of course, anything to help the town.
But of course, the success of my adopted home of NuArk is my highest priority.
That's my highest priority, everything for the good of NuArk. And...
As you may have heard, Sir Ellsworth and I arrived here together some time ago, but that doesn't mean I agree with everything he was up to. SosKaid pressed him on any information that might help her find him. I of course don't want to see him hurt. He glanced at the rifle slung over SosKaid's shoulder. But if you only want to talk, I can tell you that he did have a little bolt hole to which he may have now headed, at least to gather supplies, if he was in fact planning to skip town, as it were.
I think it was in location 36 in a festive 24 delightful. Okay, so he has a always talked about in town as being incredibly dangerous and not worth going there. Don't go there, but it's rumoured that he had a little stash there. Let's look at our map here.
There is an abandoned circus about an hour's journey south of here. Once you come out of the bowl and follow the old road, you'll see a pre-war sign for Melrose. Continue along the road and you'll come across the Gala Big Top. SosKaid made a note on her map and then quickly tucked it away again when she noticed Wright furtively peering at it. Very dangerous place, they say. You wouldn't catch me there.
It is called... It's called the Carnival Gala. Is it within an hour's walk? I think it's likely, because if it's a stash. I think it's very likely. Is it within an hour's walk? Black this time. 59. Yes, it's within an hour's walk of town to the northeast southwest. I want to see if SosKaid can tell. Is there something he's not telling her? Is he lying about something? So that gives us a perception and speech. Maybe. No, speech is charisma. Can we use sneak 50-50? Yeah, we can use sneak. To see if he's being sneaky and dodgy.
SosKaid studied the man's face. It was lined but well looked after. Clean shaven, but SosKaid noticed a nasty scar half hidden under his slightly oily locks that were carefully arranged over that side of his face. She also noticed some faded green stains on his fingers and one of his forearms. Was he lying to her? She wondered.
So that gives us a tagged skill of 11. Difficulty 1. Does she notice? Let's see, is he being honest? I think it's unlikely. Black first. He is not being completely honest. Does SosKaid notice anything? She does not.
His eyes were hard over his slightly cocky smile, but she couldn't tell if he was being honest or not. She had no choice but to take him on his word. For now, at least.
So she takes his word for it. She maybe has a bit of a feeling, but at this stage she doesn't have time to figure out all the politics. And let's see, what is it that he's lying about? What is he not telling us? His motivation. That wants to help him escape. I think they were probably... Okay, were they working together or were they rivals? 50-50? They were working together. So he wants to help Ellsworth escape. I don't think Wright wants to escape because he's got a pretty good business going here and he's unsuspected. So he wants to help Ellsworth escape, and therefore I think that this is a setup for an ambush. So maybe there's no stash there at all, or maybe he is going to inform Ellsworth somehow. I'm not sure.
Thank you for your time, said SosKaid, looking away from his stare. Something had changed in his face as he looked at her. A flash of curiosity, perhaps? It almost looked like recognition. Where exactly did you come from, and how is it that you find yourself in our humble town? SosKaid, was it? Said Wright as SosKaid made to leave. I'd better get going if I want to make it back before dark, mumbled SosKaid, avoiding the question. Of course, replied Wright, looking deep in thought. Adventurers must adventure, I suppose. He turned on his heel and pulled the heavy door open, disappearing into the darkened room inside, leaving SosKaid standing. She had a slightly uneasy feeling after their interaction. Something about the way he was looking at her. Anyway, she didn't have time for that now. She wanted to be as prepared as possible before leaving, and there were still a few people to talk to. She wondered what dangers would await her at the gala.
So that's what we're going to do. And she doesn't know that, but it's a trap. Or if not a trap, he just wants to send her in the wrong direction so that Ellsworth can escape. Okay. Rested and everything.
SosKaid turned back to the marketplace and peered over to the corner that Aya had said she might find this youthful Corey.
So first we're going to ask, is he there? It says he's off and out, so I think it's a 50-50 chance. He is there. Not only is he there, he's extremely there. So not only is he there, but she is looking for him, and he taps her on the shoulder while she's looking for him, and she turns around and there he is.
SosKaid jumped as she felt a tap on the shoulder. Excuse me, I didn't mean to startle you, came a raspy but friendly voice. SosKaid took a step back and shaded her eyes from the sun so she could clearly see who'd spoken. A ghoul stood before her. Welcome to the denizens of the Wasteland, your guide to the unimaginable horror that is modern life in the wild. Today, we are looking at ghouls. Ooh. Prolonged exposure to the effects of background gamma radiation that was left after the Great War can occasionally and inexplicably cause humans to experience a phenomenon known as ghoulification. If ghoulified, a human takes on a corpse-like appearance. Flesh begins to slacken or tear off, and a stiffening of the vocal cords tends to lend a raspy quality to their voice. Despite first-glance appearances, a ghoul's intelligence, humanity, and disposition is not necessarily that of a monster, and they can be as intelligent and friendly, or evil and heartless, as any human. However, if a ghoul ever loses their higher brain function, they descend into a feral state where they become nothing more than mindless creatures who attack non-ghouls on sight. This in part may be cause for some of the mistrust and revilement that certain groups feel towards these once fellow humans. Ghouls are immune to radiation, the effects of aging, and can live indefinitely in the wasteland if left unmurdered. A ghoul stood before her. Impossible as it was, obviously, to tell its age due to skin discoloration and straight-up abandonment of some of its face, she was struck by a certain youthfulness radiating from the figure. The ghoul smiled, with the half of his face he had left. A glint of gold came from one of his oddly white and well-aligned teeth. "Corey," the ghoul said, extending a hand. His voice still had that raspy edge, but it was somehow light and young. "SosKaid," she replied, taking his Brahmin-skinned gloved hand and giving it a firm shake, stopping awkwardly as she had the image of his arm falling off. "I've been looking forward to meeting you, young hero. Do you walk with me for a moment?" Corey said as he cocked his arm in a gentlemanly manner for SosKaid to link with.
He introduces himself. He wants to support her. He's a good guy in this situation. Good, friendly old ghoul. And he tells her that he knows she's looking for Ellsworth. He was a bad sort, and he would love him to see come to.
SosKaid allowed herself to be steered away from Wright's resident as she took the ghoul by his wiry left arm. As she turned, she thought she saw a hint of movement from Dr. Wright's window. Merely an adjustment of the light? "It's my understanding that you're looking for our resident crook, Sir Ellsworth," rasped the ghoul, not unpleasantly as he strolled them nonchalantly through some of the busier parts of the marketplace. She nodded. "And did the good Dr. Wright have any helpful recommendations?" SosKaid wasn't sure why, but she felt like trusting Corey. This was not an emotional experience she'd had many times in her life, but now with Aya, twice in 2 days. Maybe she was going soft being behind these walls. Corey listened intently as SosKaid described what Wright had told her about Gala, while the ghoul nodded with interest.
Does he know where Ellsworth might be? I think it's likely. No, he doesn't actually know where he might be. But he does say that if he can help in any other way.
"I've had my eye on Ellsworth for some time, and his compatriots. He's certainly involved in some dark dealings around town, but unfortunately I don't know where he is."
He asks him then, I think it's safe to assume he knows about that place. He says, well, I don't know if if Ellsworth had a stash or anything there, but it certainly exists. And yes, it's dangerous. I don't think there's super mutants there because that's close. I don't think there's raiders there. I think it's infested with some kind of animal.
"I haven't been to Gala myself, but a few of the capable locals would occasionally head down if the mole rat population started getting out of control and they started wandering up this way."
Is it infested with roaches? I think it's likely. No, it's not infested with roaches. Is it anything worse than mole rats? No.
"A while back, though, some kids thought it brave to go there and try and bring back some kind of trophy," said the ghoul solemnly. "Bad business it was."
He says he doesn't know of any sort of stash there, but he knows it's really dangerous and it's infested with mole rats. They don't go down there anymore, if at all possible. Occasionally they might send some people down to just cull the population a bit if they're starting to creep into the settlement, but really they don't like going there.
"Only one of the boys made it back with his arm hanging off in threads. Didn't make it through the night," continued Corey. "Mole rats, he said, but he did mention that one of the buildings looked to be locked up tight and was fenced off from the rats. Unfortunately, that was all he managed to get out before he passed." The ghoul looked genuinely upset. "That was the worst loss we had in the village for a long time. I've been pretty lucky down here in the hole, you see." Remember that rolling doubles when asking a fate question leads to an interrupt or random event occurring. I roll doubles.
Okay, now we have an interrupt event. So, how does that work?
SosKaid nodded and found herself touching the ghoul on the arm. Corey looked up from where he'd been staring into the crowd and smiled at her. "If you're heading there, please be careful," he rasped.
So the random event is 41. It's an NPC negative.
"And if you can find any evidence of the boys we lost, trinkets, whatnot, I'm sure the families would find some closure in having them returned. Corey stopped speaking and his ears seemed to prick up. He muttered, "Something's not right."
Okay, here we go. At this stage, while they're talking and she is gearing up what she's going to do, and he's offering his help, out of the shack of Aya's sister bursts out, and she is a bloody super mutant.
The bang of a thin metal door flying off its hinges sent a ripple through the crowd of the people in the square. A brief shocked silence fell over the crowd before the screams and panic set in. SosKaid's hand immediately fell to the pistol in her holster as she saw a hulking green figure burst out of what had once been a door of a small residence shack. The super mutant stopped in the middle of the quickly dispersing crowd, looking around in a dazed panic, shielding its eyes from the bright midday sun.
So that's kind of expected because she was sick and no one knew what was wrong with her. She bursts out as a super mutant and she starts, I think she's crazed as well. Is she aggressive? I think it's very likely she's aggressive. 72, yes.
In a rage, the super mutant grabbed a small food stand and effortlessly picked it up over its head before smashing it to the ground, splintering it to pieces as the hapless shopkeeper half crawled and half ran to a relatively safe distance. The monster paused for a moment, looking around the place. A flicker of fear seemed to flash across its face.
So she comes out and she's aggressive. She bursts out the door into the middle of the marketplace and she... Does she attack us? No, I think she's just trying to get out of there. Like she smashes up some stuff as she's going out there.
The creature's gaze seemed to focus properly for the first time and settled on the raised pistols in SosKaid's hand that she didn't even realize she had readied and trained on the threat.
SosKaid doesn't know that this is the sister, so she pulls up her weapon and then also out of the building runs Aya, and he says, don't shoot, that's my sister."
"That's my sister!" came a shout from the recently enlarged doorway from whence the mutant had come. It was Aya. He looked terrified and was clearly injured, but he rushed to the mutant's side in a vain attempt to shield the thrice his size creature from SosKaid's aim.
Are we going to kill her?
SosKaid maintained her aim, weaving slightly around Aya's pathetically small form in the face of the massive mutant. This mutant, sister or not, could rip him apart in a heartbeat. She couldn't just let him die and do nothing.
So I don't think we necessarily just kill super mutants, but everyone's scared. Does anyone in the village attack? I think it's likely because they've just had it. Yeah, so the villagers start attacking the super mutant.
"Protect the mayor!" someone shouted as a small group of those SosKaid recognized from the wall broke off from the quickly forming circle around the unlikely pair. One of them dragged Aya to his feet as the mutant looked to be trying to hide her huge frame behind the boy.
He's yelling to stop.
"Get off me!" shouted Aya as he broke free from the grip of the civilian who'd managed to drag him away. He took a few steps back towards the mutant and stopped for a moment, wavering slightly, clearly dizzy from whatever injury he'd suffered at the hands of his sister.
As all this is going on, a shot rings out.
SosKaid felt the bloom of a ring in her left ear and tasted the acrid grit of powder smoke as she watched in horror as Aya fell to the ground.
And behind her is standing Right with a smoking pistol. And a silence falls over NuArk. SosKaid hears a shot fire and sees Right with the smoking pistol. Does Right actually shoot Aya? I actually think that's likely. Yeah. So not only does he shoot Aya, but he kills Aya dead in the confusion. No one else saw that it was him.
SosKaid saw the pistol held low, gunslinger style, near her shoulder. She turned her head slightly. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. She saw Right tuck the pistol away with one hand, look at her, and then vanish into thin air.
The super mutant then turns around and roars in pain and despair, seeing her brother shot. And she picks up her brother and throws him over her shoulder and pushes her way out of the city.
Still looking down her sights, she noticed her vision start to blur slightly, and a slowly expanding pool of blood began to lazily spread out from the unmoving body of the town's young mayor. Her arms were shaking, but she couldn't seem to convince them to drop their aim. Time seemed to speed up again, and a wave of sound engulfed her. The mutant roared, bent over the small body on the ground before picking up her brother and pushing her way through the crowd. More shouts. "Stop the mutant! The mayor! Is he dead? What have you done?" Then came another voice, loud and commanding from the other side of the crowd. "The outsider! She did this!" It was right. Somehow he was now on the other side of the crowd. SosKaid heard the words, but she didn't understand them. "Arrest her!" came the command, and before SosKaid could move, heavy arms fell over both her shoulders and around her waist. She felt any fight she had leave her body as she relented to the guards.
So I think Wright is in a natural position to take over leadership of the city, and he'd been wanting to do something. He was probably involved in the FEV stuff in the first place to sow unrest. He may have even informed the super mutant. Like he's been sowing seeds of distrust and chaos because he wants to take over the settlement, which is turning into quite a buzzing and profitable little trading hub. I want to know if he will put the blame on SosKaid. I think he absolutely will. He's going to shout, it was her, the outsider.
SosKaid lifted her head from her hands. Her face was dry. She hadn't cried properly since the incident at the facility. She found she couldn't anymore.
Never fear, we have her in custody now. Justice will be served. In the meantime, before we appoint a new leader, I will, with sorrow, dutifully look after the settlement's interests until a new leader can be found.
She could hear a loud voice floating across the still marketplace of NuArk, an endless droning speech about freedom and security and driving out anyone who threatened their way of life. SosKaid listened, numb, to the sounds of the marketplace begin to die down as the sun slowly started to set. SosKaid tongued the sharp iron-tasting bobby pin she'd hidden in her cheek. One day, she would kill him. She waited.
As she's getting dragged away, she lets it happen. She doesn't want to become a scapegoat and him kill her as well. And so she lets it happen. She's also not very strong, but she does see particular interest from youthful Corey as he whispers something to her midnight tonight. And she also catches youthful Corey's eye after he says this, and catches your eye and gives you just the subtlest hint of a nod. As SosKaid gets dragged away and locked up behind bars, her weapons taken from her, she is now a prisoner of Wright in the cell in NuArk. That is not at all where I expected this to go. I guess that is the beauty of Mythic. Next thing we want to do is we're going to escape at midnight. We're just going to sit and wait and then see if we can escape at midnight. And we're going to end it there.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of A Wasteland Story, and what a wild ride that was. This session in particular was the point where I really started to understand the narrative power of Mythic. I spent the whole session lining up little video game style quests to do little quest things like collecting things, killing things, and getting rewards, and Mythic sent the story spiraling in a whole new direction that ended up becoming the core plotline to this whole series of the show. Just wonderful stuff. If you've been on the fence about trying Mythic, give it a go. You don't have to know it inside out before starting. I didn't, as evidenced by all the rules mistake that I made, but it doesn't matter. Just give it a go. You might surprise yourself. In other news, I mentioned on the last episode that I was working on a few other bits and pieces, and one of them I am proud to say I can finally announce. I started another show, both because that seems to be my answer for everything, but mostly because I really wanted to discuss solo role-playing in general with those content creators who inspired me to start playing, and in the hope that it can also be a shortcut to get you playing or inspire you to try something new. The chats are reasonably casual, discussing some tips on how to get into solo role-playing, but also just talking about general gameplay, games that we're playing and excited about. I also plan to do some one-shot actual play sessions in there, playing some of the systems that are sitting in opportunity on my shelf but haven't fully thought that through yet. The show is called the Solo Roleplayers Podcast, link in the show notes, and my first guest is one of the first creators that I came across in this space. From YouTube, A Man Alone, and you can catch his interview right now over on the Solo Roleplayers Podcast. As for me, I'm away for a couple of weeks on holiday, but I do still plan to get some writing and mixing in, because I really look forward to bringing you SosKaid's next chapter as she tries to get herself out of this dire situation that she's found herself in. Will there be more raiders? A ghoulish settlement? A thickening FEV plot that spreads much further and wider than just this small town? Yes! So, find out next time on A Wasteland Story. Follow the show if you don't already so as not to miss it, and if you like what I'm doing here, giving me a rate and review would be much appreciated. Until then, just remember that in the case of a limited-scale nuclear war or some other world-ending catastrophe, please refer to the appropriate documentation. Bye!